Hi, everyone. My name is Gretchen Rowe, and it's my pleasure to welcome these two beautiful ladies with whom I work today to talk to you as first-time homeschool parents. I know when we begin the journey of homeschool, each of us comes to it for a different reason, and each of the three of us are here for very different reasons, but we're delighted to have the opportunity to share with you all today. My name is Gretchen Rowe. I'm a veteran homeschooling mom of 21 years, and I am that homeschool mom who said I would never do that. And I only did it never 21 times in a row, so I wouldn't have changed that 21 years for anything on the planet, and would that we were still homeschooling in my family. It would be terrific. It's my pleasure to welcome today Lisa Cimento and Amanda Capps. And Lisa, if you could introduce yourself, and then Amanda, I will allow you to do the same, and then we'll get started.
Sure. I'm Lisa Cimento. I work as a customer success consultant here at Demme Learning and a placement specialist. I am also a veteran homeschool mom. I homeschooled my 4 children for 25 years in various states and through many moves. We used Math UC for 24 of those years. Wish we had spelling UC. They didn't at the time. We really could have used it. My 4 children are grown and flown and on their own. We live here in Florida. I work remotely, and it is really a pleasure to work with such a fabulous team of people and to deal with such wonderful customers. I can't thank you all enough for the things that you've taught me. And I hope that we can share something with you today that you can bring forward.
And I am Amanda Capps. I am a little bit unique in that I'm a second generation homeschooler. So I am actually a graduate of homeschooling myself. And now I am homeschooling my own brood, of which there are 8. I have just graduated my first, so I am right there in the trenches with you ladies who are in the throes of homeschooling yourselves. So I currently still am homeschooling a 15-year-old, a 12, a 10, a 7, and I have a 4, 2, and 1 coming up behind them that I will be homeschooling once they are of age. I have worked in customer service for Demme Learning for the last 11 years, and in some form or facet prior to that since I was 14. So I have a long history with Demme Learning, with our customers, with homeschooling, and just support in general. And I'm thrilled to be here today.
I think each of us brings a unique perspective to the table as far as our homeschooling journeys. And so we have lots of information to share with you all today. My main goal here is to allow these lovely ladies to share terrific information with you. We did have lots of registrants. We had lots of questions, so we will turn our attention to those questions. But we really felt like there were some things that you guys should need to know. Let me also say that these roundtables are designed not just for families who use Demme Learning materials. And those of you who watch this video as follow-up, if there's somebody that you know who is new to homeschooling who would benefit from participating in a viewing of this video, by all means, please feel free to share this and pass it on. In our Demme Learning Guild, we have a Homeschooling 101 book, which may indeed help those who are sitting on the fence. Those of us who homeschool know people who are saying, gee, I've thought about that. And as the world turns and becomes a little bit odder every year, some of us think more carefully about that process. So I will be giving you a link in the chat. It will be part of our follow-up email as well to that book. And I'm going to throw the first question out here and let you ladies get started. Let's talk in generalities first. How about general planning? How do you get it all done? I'm going to start with Lisa, and then I'm going to go to Amanda, and then we'll move on from that point.
Okay, great. Setting goals is a big piece of this. And, you know, goals are great things. I'm not great at setting goals. I just fair warning here. It took me a long time to figure out what I needed to do, but just start to jot down some ideas. The number one thing that I will say is Be ready to learn how to be flexible, because some of those goals that you set, you may or may not be able to achieve. Some you may be able to achieve a little later on and maybe not right away. You're going to look at the children that you have and their ages and start to get ready to learn things about them that you never knew and that you didn't know you needed to know. This is really a learning time for the whole family. This is not school at home. You are not going to recreate a classroom. You don't want to. Those classrooms are there because they have to handle lots and lots and lots of kids in one spot. You don't. So this is really for you going to be more like a tutorial setting. And you have a lot of flexibility. I would say, let's see, HSLDA. If you don't know what the laws are in your state, that's a really good place to start. Homeschool Legal Defense Organization. Their website address is hslda.org and probably .com as well. And they have a nice thing on their webpage where you can go to your state and find out what the laws for homeschooling are. You need to find out whether or not you have to report to your local county superintendent of schools and send a letter of intent. You need to find out whether or not testing is mandatory at the end of the year, or maybe you have the option of just having your kids evaluated by a state certified teacher. I did that for almost every single year that we homeschooled. And that gives you a lot of good options for different reasons. So that's a good place that I would say to start. When you're talking about your day, there's lots of things to think about. I learned something really, really helpful about the second year that I was homeschooling by a veteran homeschool mom. And she said, plan your day around your meals. Figure out what time you wanted to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and make those fairly set. And then work your school day around that. That way you won't be trying to get things accomplished for school and then run into your meals and then everybody starts getting hangry. Because my brood got hangry. So you want to make sure that you are feeding them on time and that you break and that you take the time to rest when you need to. That's just some general stuff. Amanda, did you want to throw some more stuff out there? You and I chatted a lot about this yesterday.
Sure. So I came into homeschooling with a little bit of an advantage, or what I perceive as an advantage, because I had kind of already been steeped in the, homeschool environment because I grew up in that. So I didn't come in with these preconceived notions. I didn't have any experience with a traditional classroom, which in a lot of ways was really, to me, a blessing. But it can also backfire because sometimes you maybe don't come into it with a whole lot of structure, depending on what your own parents' strengths and weaknesses were in your homeschooling experience. So what I kind of already knew going into it what curriculum I wanted to use, and I have veered from that very little. There have been a few things here and there that have been new that I have added into the mix, but for the most part, I've used things that were successful with myself. I think a big thing is going in with expectations, being very careful what expectations you set on yourself and on your kids. If I had the same expectations on my third daughter that I had for my first daughter, homeschooling would have been a disaster because they're very different kids. They're very different learners. So it's always a good idea when we are initially evaluating our school year and looking at what we're going to choose for curriculums and for kids, look at the kids themselves, look at their learning strengths and weaknesses, and have a realistic idea of what those encompass, and jot down some ideas that you have based on those learning styles and those things that you've picked up on with your kids that will help guide you as you look at curriculums, because it can be very easy. I'm the type of person that can be a little bit of a curriculum hog. I love all the books, and it can be very easy to get too much going on, to get too many things, too many subjects, and try to bite off more than you or your children can accomplish effectively in a school year. So those are all pieces of advice and cautions that I would give. The other thing too is be prepared for your school year to kind of evolve as you go. Sometimes we start off really well and full steam ahead, and we're checking all the boxes and we're ticking things off, and then life happens. Curveballs happen, pregnancy happens, and morning sickness happens, or a baby is born in the midst of a school year. A parent can be in an aging or get sick, and you're going to have to step into a role of caretaking, or maybe you're traveling to take care of someone. So all of those things can impact your forward motion, but it's a wonderful thing to realize that homeschooling is very fluid, it's very mobile, and you can easily do what you need to do no matter where you're at. And don't stress yourself out feeling like maybe you're missing something or you're not getting to everything, because really, as long as you're hitting those core subjects, you're going to be fine.
I think one of the things that's really important is to hold your expectations loosely, and to also recognize that when we see other homeschoolers out in the environment, or we have conversations, or we see on Facebook, that somebody's child is doing ballet and tap and swimming and playing first string soccer and learning Chinese, those are highlight reels. And you don't know the reality of what happens in their home. So don't let, as Amanda says so often, let comparison be the thief of joy. Don't compare yourself to anyone else. This is your journey for your time with your children, and you are truly well equipped to be able to take good care of them. I'd like to talk, you guys, a little bit about expectations. I know we talked about this yesterday before I had to hop off of our conversation, and the expectations that this is not school at home. And I wonder if you guys could speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, this is a common thing. And I think for most brand new homeschoolers, you have this idea, I need to go out and get a couple of desks, and I need to have lots and lots of books and paper and all of these things. And I'm going to put stuff on my walls, and I'm going to stand in front with a piece of, a marker and my whiteboard and a ruler and a yardstick. But you can sit down next to your kids. They learn best in a warm, engaging atmosphere. They learn well when there is very little stress. When stress enters any learning situation, learning tends to stop. So when you can bring stress down and make things as comfortable as possible, that learning has much more fodder for growth. And so that's a big piece of it. Curriculum. When I started 30 or so years ago, there were very few curriculum choices. They're endless now. If you've ever been to a homeschool convention, you notice that the vendor hall is enormous. Be careful. Don't buy the first thing you see. Do as much research as you can. If you can find a homeschool support group or other homeschoolers that you know of, either locally or online, they are going to be such a wonderful resource for you, a great support network. But they can also tell you their experiences with certain curriculum and certain things that they have done that have worked and that have not worked. Like Gretchen said, we don't want to compare ourselves with others, but we can glean information and wisdom from people who have been there, done that, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So be careful about just piling up stuff. The first year that I homeschooled, I bought curriculum. The books were, over my kids' heads on the table. I couldn't see them. It was crazy. And a very wise woman said to me, put the books away for a while, go to the library, choose some great reading material, and sit down and read to your kids for a while. You will make mistakes. That probably doesn't sound like a very encouraging thing to say. But if you can embrace that right now, before you go one step further, you will be so much better off in the long run. You have to make mistakes. Mistakes are necessary for us to learn anything. And this homeschooling journey will be as much learning for you as it is for your children. So you will make changes. You may buy curriculum and you may find that it doesn't work for your family. You may find that you bought something that works for one kid and not another. You might have to make scheduling changes. So changes will happen. And as you're going to hear us say probably 100 times today, flexibility. I like Gretchen always likes to say, flexibility is a sign of intelligence. You can be the smartest person in the world by being as flexible as possible. But that does require being very loose with those expectations. Set your goals, set your plans, and be ready to have things change if necessary, and be okay with that.
I can speak to that, personally, because, my oldest daughter was a very independent, very self-motivated, very driven student. She did a lot of student-directed learning, which honestly was a blessing because it freed me up to work with younger students in our family. But then, also personality types. I have a 10-year-old son who is up at 6:30 and he is ready for his list and he is ready to have his, his schedule and his day lined out. And he likes to check the boxes. I mean, that is just how he is wired. And my 12-year-old daughter doesn't function until after 10 a.m. Like there is no cohesive communication. There is no point in me even trying to get her to have follow through on a task. She is literally not going to really get in her groove until about after 10 a.m. And so if I were expecting her to be up at 6:30 and chipper and ready to start her list, she would be absolutely hating every moment of our homeschooling experience. If I were to put the brakes on and tell Cooper, hey, you've got to wait because we're not getting started until 10 o'clock, he would be spinning his wheels for hours. And by the time we got around to doing, things, I would have completely lost his attention span and his motivation. So there is beauty in recognizing the differences in your children and not getting frustrated by them. If I expected Cooper or Eva to be basically to have taught themselves to read the way that my first two did. I mean, I literally do not remember teaching them to read. They just seemed to kind of pick it up and go, and they were launched. And we have had really significant struggles with getting the other two, even though they're wired very differently in their drive and their motivation. They share a common thread in just really struggling to read. And we have pursued, some official diagnoses with them, and they do have dyslexia and some ADD and ADHD going on. And so those are things that I have researched and learned about and embraced. And I have geared curriculum towards, being successful for those types of learners. So it's a process. I didn't just get handed this baby and magically know everything that I was supposed to do to help them be successful. It has been a process, and it has been something we have learned through the years together. Eva has always been a little bit of a slow mover. I mean, like there's just not anything quick about Eva, and that's not bad. She's not lazy. She just moves at a slower pace than my other kids. And so you just recognize that. And then I have, some kids like Cooper, and he's Speedy Gonzalez, and it's just like he's all over the place. And so it's harder to just kind of get him to like calm down and stop overthinking and say, hey, bud, breathe, and let's focus for a few minutes on this and go with it. You can absolutely do homeschooling on your couch in your pajamas. I 9 times out of 10, may not have brushed my hair or teeth, and I'm with a mug of coffee and I've got a toddler on each side, and I'm, teaching something or reading something out loud. It's really designed to be an environment. And I love the way that Lisa described that as an environment of learning. It's true. I mean, if everyone is in their desk or at their chair and their backs are straight and they've got a book on their head and you're standing over them with a ruler, no one is going to enjoy that experience. I'm not a drill sergeant. I'm an instructor. And my goal, and our biggest goal as a homeschooling parent, is to create a lifelong learner.
So what I'm hearing from you and what I'm hearing from Lisa as well is our greatest task in this first year of homeschooling, because we're presuming that the folks who are going to be watching this video are folks who are new to the homeschooling world, is to observe our children and learn how they need to learn, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and
Totally.
you know things about your kids, obviously, but there will be more that will come out. The way that they learn, their attention span to certain tasks. There may be some things that they can sit for 15, 20 or more minutes very attentively, and other things, it's going to be 5 to 10 minutes, and that's what you'll get, and that's fine. And I don't know if you were planning on bringing this up later, Gretchen, but while I'm thinking about it, I'm just going to mention this, because this is another thing that I think is a misunderstanding when we think about a classroom setting and how learning happens in what we're used to seeing in a school. And that is, children learn best and retain material better when they are given it in smaller bites more consistently over more days than when you're trying to make them gobble up a great deal of work for a long time. And a general rule of thumb is that you can add about 3 minutes to your child's age. And that's the amount of peak performance time and attention span that you're going to get from them, and for long-term retention of that material. So instead of making them sit for a half an hour, 45 minutes to an hour on a single subject, let's rethink this. I mean, it really is going to take some thinking outside of what we're used to here, and recognize that that's not how they learn best. Research is bearing this out. We certainly hear it anecdotally every day. And it allows their brain opportunity to absorb that stuff, digest it. Sue likes to say marinate on it. And then you can come back to it. You want to divvy up what they're doing throughout the day so that they're not doing, sitting for an hour on a single subject. When you have a high schooler, yeah, maybe, I don't know, maybe not, but certainly not a young child. And I think that plays into the idea of expectations, that we think that we just have to keep them there and sitting and working and working and working, because when is enough enough? We're used to having children in school from 8:30 to 2:30 or something like that. But when you're at home homeschooling your children, it doesn't need to take that long.
Right. I think that's a really good observation. And I want to catch up on something. Lisa, actually, to be honest, you read my mind, because I did want to bring that in. So I appreciate that. Amanda, I want you to speak briefly about when you have a child who has a learning difference. What's the difference between using it as an excuse and using it as a reason? And if you, because I know exactly what I'm talking about that. And so could you offer some encouragement? Because I know statistically there will be more than one parent who watches this recording who has a child with a learning difference. So.
Well, and I think too, it's really important to talk about the difference between the way that those learning differences are handled in a school setting versus how they're handled in a homeschool setting. Testing is very different if you're handling that privately versus in a school setting. Sometimes a student may be coming out of a formal school setting with an IEP, or one of those things, and so I think the best conversation, or the best way to take this is, what accommodations are helpful and what accommodations are crippling, because we don't want, just because we have a learning difference or a learning challenge or a learning block, or however you want to, describe it. I do not like the word disability, because I don't believe it's a disability. It's just a difference. It's a learning difference. It's a different way for information to go in and to be processed. And different brains are wired differently. So I think we have to be, first of all, if we notice something's up, If we're noticing something consistently noticing letter reversals, consistently noticing super sloppy handwriting or weird spaces or things that are happening within writing, or we're crying when we're writing, or we lay our head down on the desk or the table and we just don't like it, or we're not wanting to look at the page as we're reading, but we're guessing words, and and just some of those things that are like consistently happening, and that you're going, wait a minute, we're really just not making any progress. Those are the kinds of red flags that can kind of maybe clue you in as a parent that the child is frustrated, that you're frustrated, that they're having to work harder than they should to learn, or to retain. Maybe retention isn't there. Like maybe one day you learn it and they seem to have grasped it and we're doing well and we fill out the worksheet, or we do whatever activity we're doing. And then we go to bed and we wake up the next day and we pull the same thing out and we look at you like, I don't know what this is. I don't know how to do it. Explain it to me again. And you're like, seriously? Like we learned this. You had this yesterday. What's going on? Those are the kind of things that would kind of tip you off, that maybe you need to do a little bit of further investigation. And then as far as, accommodations, so if you've got a kiddo that's dyslexic, you might want to do more read alouds. You might want to do things on audio, curriculums that offer you an audio piece that isn't relying on them reading it themselves. Things that are much more visual, things that are much more hands-on, that they can get their hands on and really connect with the material, because their eyes are just not their friends. And so they're doing things in the learning process that are causing challenges. Sometimes memorization and retention are an issue, and that's an underlying cognitive issue that can be addressed. There are programs, there are therapies, there are things. The thing is, don't get discouraged, don't panic. There are things out there that can help you find, and I cannot stress enough, find other women, men, groups that are in your corner that have some expertise in the areas that you are seeing challenges or struggles, and avail yourself of their resources, their information. We as moms, we're happy to get in the trench with you and say, in my case, this is what happened, or this is what worked, or this is the diagnostic path that we took. We love to help each other out. We love to network. That's the goal in this. So don't be afraid to reach out. Don't sit there and stew and struggle, because there's really a lot of help out there.
So both of you mentioned something about curriculum, and I want to address this question briefly before I turn our attention to the questions that were asked of us. So can you guys each for yourselves explain what you defined as this had to be accomplished? We had to be able to do academically these things. Think about what that is in your household. In my household, it was reading, it was math, it was spelling, and composition. It was those four things. And I wonder if you would, beyond that, everything else was bonus. Now, when I say that, in our family, for our faith walk, study in our devotion was part and parcel of our being human beings. So that wasn't a curriculum for us. That was life. So I don't, different families have different approaches to that, but I would like briefly to hear from each of you, what were the non-negotiables academically for you all in your homeschool experiences? Lisa, I'll start with you.
Sure. Mine were very similar to yours, and so much so that I recognized after taking one summer off and realizing how much we had wasted time, and then had lost more time in the fall reviewing. So I began doing a small school schedule during the summer where they had to do math at least 3 days a week and reading. That was all I required for the summer. The rest of the year, the essentials were math and reading. Spelling came a little bit later. I didn't have them doing spelling too early, but I did do a little later. We did a little bit of grammar and writing. And the rest we did in different ways over the years. When my two older boys were still young boys and I had a baby, I knew that I just wasn't going to be able to do a whole lot of these lesson type things. So we did unit studies, and that incorporated science and geography and history. It incorporated some literature and arts and crafts and some music. So we got these kinds of enrichment things going through unit studies. Once my my baby girl was old enough to begin working with them, things changed shape. We also were moving, and then a fourth child came along a couple of years later on. And so the dynamic did change, and we did move away from unit studies. It just wasn't going to work anymore. But unit studies are kind of neat because you can add children of different ages all together doing activities. They did still have to do their reading and math separately according to their skill levels. But those were the necessities. Later on, when they were in, I would say, middle to high school levels, we allowed them, we were in a place that had a homeschool organization that offered competitive sports with some of the local small schools. And so they were interested in that. But, you know, I had 4 kids by that time. And I said, okay, you know, there's only so many hours in a day. And I was the only driver. And I said, you can each do one thing. You can't do more than one a year. And it's going to either be the sport, or it's going to be the instrument, or it's going to be, you know, some other outside lesson, because we just can't do it all. And I think that's one of the other things that we have to be just really, really careful about in this. If you've got multiple children, be realistic about what you guys can all handle and still have, you know, meals together. I'm going to say this. I don't think I've ever said this before in a round table, but eating your meals together is really, really a precious thing. And I know for some families, it's almost a lost art, but there is a dynamic that happens when you take your meals together that is lost when you don't. And so don't overlook the need to eat and sit around a table together, looking at each other and talking to each other. It's huge. It might be because I'm Italian, I don't know, but it's huge. And I make a big deal out of it whenever I'm with different various groups. We're going to eat together because it makes you family, even when you're not. So be careful about things that are going to constantly interrupt dinner, and you never get to sit down and eat dinner together. You know, especially if you've got a husband out working, that's his one chance to eat with his family each day. Don't lose that if you can possibly help it. So those are some of the things that I think about when we talk about the nice versus the necessary.
So yeah, I'm right there with you ladies. Reading, writing, math. I am a super stickler for history because history is my passion. So I have definitely taken that, you know, into my homeschooling experience with my kids. And it's just too important. It's an important thing for everyone to learn world and U.S. history. Devotions are definitely a part of our daily work. I also found that because of my dynamic of having multiple children and having a very large family, life skills were a big part of our everyday learning experience. I simply can't do it all. I can't do all the dishes, all the cooking, all the laundry, all the childcare. It's just not humanly possible for one person to take care of 8 people at very different developmental stages. And so that's where everybody has to pitch in. So that has been a big part of our journey personally. And you would be amazed how much little ones pick up in osmosis as they are just around older children who are learning. Or being read aloud to, or listening to CDs or MP3s of good learning things. So a big part of successful large family homeschooling is learning how to delegate and finding resources that free you up as a parent. Because if I tried to do it all and try to do it all in my own strength, it's going to be a terrible mess. and it's not all going to get done. And I'm going to have to pick and choose what gets accomplished. I've also found for our family, a big part of being successful is schooling year round. We do school year round and we take shorter, more frequent breaks versus a big break in the summer. It's too hard for me to get back into the groove. It's too hard for them to get out of the consistency, and we have to waste too much time reviewing. When if we can just keep, a little more moving forward, maybe at a little slower pace, but more consistently, that just works beautifully for our situation.
I love having the opportunity to participate in a roundtable with these ladies because we have worked together long enough now that we tend to read each other's minds a little bit. So I'm glad that you said that, Amanda, because that was part of what I wanted to make sure that parents knew is when you homeschool, it's a collaborative effort. It is not all your responsibility. And one of the things my husband has always said that I think is really important is our goal was to raise children who had character, were not characters, and to raise children who moved out of the house and were launched. And Lisa said at the very beginning, her children are launched. And Amanda just launched her first one. And I have to tell you all, it's a bittersweet moment because being a mom is the hardest job you'll ever love. You will work like crazy to be part of your child's life. And your life goal is to equip them to not have to be a necessary part of your life. And that's a hard thing to do. But it's a tremendous blessing and a joy, and I wouldn't have traded it for anything. I want to quickly turn my attention now before my husband starts up the tractor that's right outside my office window and ask you ladies to address some questions from parents. The first one I think is important. We had a parent talking about a child who dislikes math, and she wasn't the only parent, but this was one that we highlighted. So if you're going to begin an academic season with a child who is struggling academically with a subject they dislike, what would your best advice be from each of you for that parent? How do you address a subject a child doesn't like and make it a doable one?
Oh gosh. Well, I heard this recently, and I don't think that I ever thought of it when I was schooling, but I think it's brilliant. I think Sue Wachter mentioned it, or maybe it was you, Gretchen, about bringing something that the child loves first. Like my thinking in my head is, oh, if it's hard, get it out of the way first. But not everybody functions well that way. There might be some kids that love doing that. I'm going to get the hard stuff out of the way first, and then I can enjoy the rest of my day. But there's always those kids who do better when you give them a little bit of the dessert before you make them eat the vegetables. And I think that being ready with something that is really delightful for them and to whet their appetite for the day and what's to come. And it lets them know that they have some choices too in this, that you're not just going to be, like Amanda said, a drill sergeant. There is something appealing about making this enjoyable for them. And so you want to make sure that that's happening. Yeah, so I think that's one thing to do. And you have other options. Communicating with your children through this homeschool journey is going to be one of the keys to success. If you make all decisions without them, you've taken all control away. And to be able to offer options to them is really a powerful thing. So there are going to be some things that are non-negotiables, and then there are going to be some things that you want to get their feedback on. So sit down and go, okay, listen, we have to do this. I'm responsible for you morally and legally. I have to do these things. So let's find the best way to do them. Would you prefer if we did this in a read alouds? Would you prefer to write? Would you prefer to see some videos on it, to do some field trips on it? I mean, you have different options. There's so much flexibility. And you can also say, we do have to accomplish this today. What would you like to do first, this or this? Like you can give them two. and say, we're going to do this first or this first, but don't give them the option of like putting it off to the end of the day and then it not get done. But you can be creative that way. But the best thing is just to communicate.
And I would come at this from I mean, that is fantastic. And I love that, but I would come at this from a completely different angle just because I'm a different person. So I would be immediately like, ooh, what is the root cause? What is happening here? Why are we struggling? And what can we do to fix the struggle? And so I would be looking at, okay, did we miss something in our, would we need to backtrack? Like because math in particular, and you did bring up math, is so sequential and concepts build on previously learned concepts, I would immediately be looking at, did we miss something in the sequence that because we didn't master, because we're not comfortable or confident with, is causing the struggle in this time and in this place? And what can we do to help a student tackle that, remediate that, and then move forward with confidence? So I would be looking for those types of situations. But like I said, I tend to be a researcher and an overthinker and a root cause extraordinaire. Like, okay, there has to be a reason, and so we need to figure out what the reason is. So that's just something funny about my personality.
No, that's brilliant. I love it. Of course, though, you're going to get those things that there's no root cause. They just hate it.
Right. There is that. No joke.
Okay, so thanks, Lisa. I'll pay you $1 later for teeing that one up for me, because how do we evaluate when kids give us pushback, when they don't want to do something? Can both of you talk about?
I think you need to look at a couple of different things. Is it a relational thing? Like, could there be something going on in the relationship that needs to be addressed, communicated, repaired? Maybe they're just feeling really unheard, or they have been struggling for a while, and maybe you just haven't taken the time to pick up on and kind of help come alongside them. And then sometimes too, and Lisa and I talked about this extensively yesterday, sometimes we are doing too much for our kids, and we are in essence setting them up and giving them expectations that, we're going to write the notes, or we're going to provide the tool and the solution and the answer. And this is a great opportunity to say, where's your responsibility in this? It's not my job necessarily to make your life a cakewalk, and you are in my home, and I'm going to provide, tools and resources and things that you need on some level. But there has to be some responsibility on behalf of the student to take initiative for their learning and for things that are hard. So do they need to take notes? Do they need to make cue cards? Do they need to write it out? Because writing and that process sometimes just helps solidify and cement information. Do they need to seek out a documentary or a video about that particular topic? Do they need to have a course about how to study well? That is not always a natural and intuitive skill that kids come into the world having. Oh, I know how to study and absorb information and take and be a note taker and highlight and use my textbook as a resource. That is something that has to be taught. And so whether that's something that I'm teaching them as a parent and equipping them with, or there are some great, I remember a great courses that I watched about, it was done by a basketball coach. And so he used a lot of sports analogies, but he talked about learning and developing good study skills and good study habits. And I have carried that information and that knowledge with me from the moment, and it made me a better student, just being exposed to that information. So I think it's really important to maybe evaluate, where is the dislike and the angst and the anxiety coming from? And, am I doing too much as a parent? Are they not taking enough responsibility and doing enough as a student? Is there maybe some responsibility on both parts that we could communicate and do things a little better or a little differently?
I have to tell you, one of the things I am reminded of, one of my children who was a tough customer as far as getting things done. He was not ADHD, but he was definitely ADD. It was kind of like trying to school Mr. Magoo. And, you know, he would wander off into the wild blue yonder. Now, his nose was buried in a book 90% of his waking hours. But I vividly remember when he was just about 13 years old, we were at loggerheads and he did not want to do school, did not want to do what he was doing, and was going to give me tons of pushback. And I had had some success with his older sister at taking everything out of her life but academics, and adding those things back into her life that she felt had value when she started complying academically. So, you know, I figured it would work for him. And so I moved him onto a camp cot in my dining room with a little milk crate full of his clothes. And that was where he was going to stay until he started complying to do school. And long story short, he was in my dining room right short of 4 months. And he wore me down and he outlasted me. I wanted him out of my dining room because I wanted to have Easter at my house. And I needed this kid out of my dining room. It took us that whole winter, January, February, March, into that first week of April, to finally have a conversation about the fact that he hated the schoolwork that we were doing and he didn't like it. And he wanted to go back to materials that we had used in the past. And so then we had a conversation about economics. And I said, well, I spent money for this material that you have. And so how am I supposed to be able to afford to go back to this other material that you want? And he was motivated enough to want to return to that other material that he paid for it himself. He had a newspaper route and he paid us for that material. So sometimes it's not what you're doing that's wrong, it's what you're doing it with that is wrong. And the reason that I tell you this story is I hope in that your homeschool journeys, it doesn't take you 4 months to realize you've hitched your wagon to the wrong horse. But it was a valuable experience for us all in that process, for him to be able to learn what worked and what didn't work. And in that, what I look back on that now is, here was a child who was beginning to say, this is what appeals to me, this is what drives me forward, and I'm willing to invest in it to make that happen. And that is when you really do have a lifelong learner on your hands. And that is what changed an enormous amount for us. So I hope you find that to be the same. I do think there are negotiables that you can, I'm not above bribing children. The three of us get bribed, if you will. We're paid to come to work every day. And I think the three of us would probably show up, whether we were paid or not, because we love what we do. But I think there is also virtue in negotiating with a child who has something that they don't like doing, on what kind of incentives or rewards might be inherent in completing that desired goal academically. And that's something that will be different for every family and every subject. And so I would like to encourage you to have those conversations in your household and think about what that might be. Ladies, I wonder, we had more than one parent ask us about math UC in particular and mastery. And I want you guys to define for parents what mastery is, but I also want you to take it out of just the context of math UC, and how can learning what it means to master something be applied to other academic experiences other than math. And Lisa, I'll start with you.
Okay, so for the purposes of thinking about if you're using math UC, we do use a mastery approach. And what that means is that rather than throwing lots of different things at kids every year and hoping they'll pick some of those up, but we have to keep moving on whether they do or not, what we say is, no, you stick with a topic until that child is showing understanding and consistent proficiency, and is able to communicate back to you what they understand. That teach back is a hugely important tool for recognizing whether or not a student has a good understanding of the material. There are lots of ways to do that with other things than math. You know, I know that Charlotte Mason method talks about narration and having a student share back. By the same token, however, sometimes that doesn't happen instantly, and sometimes there needs to be repetition and practice for that to be shown. You will see that students can pick up some things very, very quickly and begin using them in practical ways. Math is, you know, all over our lives. When you go to the grocery store, you can start teaching your child to compute what the change is going to be when you pay for something. Although I know we don't pay a lot in cash these days, but if you do, that's a perfect opportunity for them to put math into practice. If you are cooking in your kitchen, I mean, there's math everywhere with measurements of recipes, even time. You have to set a table and have a family sit down to eat. How much time is everything going to take to cook? This is a huge life skill too. So school at home, you know, homeschooling is going to be, it's going to envelop your life, because everything you're doing together provides an opportunity for learning. And I apologize, Gretchen, because you did ask this question, but I wanted to say something on the tail of what you and Amanda had shared just a moment ago, because it feels important to me. And that is, when we are getting pushback from our children, we need to also be willing to ask ourselves, is it me? Is there anything that I'm doing that's causing this pushback? And it could be a couple of things. Maybe we're being too rigid. Maybe we've got this expectation that our kid's not meeting up to. Maybe we're anxious about teaching the material because we don't feel confident. If you think that that anxiety isn't felt by your kids, you got another thing coming, because it absolutely does transfer. And then they start feeling fearful. I can't tell you how many people we talk to, they call us and they're like, oh, I'm so terrible at math and da 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 da. And you hear it 3 or 4 times and you have to go, whoa, 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 whoa. You may have struggled with math, but you can be learning right along with your children. And more than that, you can be demonstrating a teachable spirit to your child as you learn with them. You're also demonstrating a correctable and approachable spirit if you're willing to go to your child and go, I'm recognizing that you're really not enjoying this. Is there anything that I'm doing that is causing it, or that I can do to help make this better for you? So there, just to be able to ask a question like that. Not everybody is great at everything. When it came time to teach the kids to drive, one lesson from me, and everybody in my household went, nope, Dad's going to do this one, because I just am terrible at it. I'm terrible. So, but after the first one, I was like, you don't want me to teach you to drive. And that was a valid thing. So, you know, you don't have to do everything. Like we said, you may find a co-op where somebody who is great at this thing can teach your child that one subject, or maybe your husband can teach. You have so much flexibility, but be willing to look and see if maybe you're contributing to that difficulty. And I'll let you get back to your topic. Sorry.
No, that was terrific. And I really do appreciate your saying it. And sometimes that's the hardest thing, because we want so much for our kids to succeed. It's hard to say, what can I do better than what I'm presently doing? Amanda, can you talk a little bit about how that mastery reaches beyond just math and into life?
Absolutely. So, and on that, I would love to say as well, if you think the only time that you can count as academic as when you have the books open or you're working in a workbook, you're losing a lot of valuable opportunity to count education for your kids. If you are in the kitchen and you are cooking and you are using measurement and fractions and and you're doubling recipes, or you're cutting a recipe in half, or whatever the situation may be, going to the grocery store, like Lisa was talking about, that taking your kids and having them price shop and price compare, and if this is this much and there's this many ounces and this is this, which is the better buy. I mean, those are all things where you're just doing something that needs to be done. Everybody has to grocery shop, everybody has to cook. Those are all things that you can count that time. Absolutely. You can write it down in your lesson plan, and it is just as legitimate as the 30 minutes you spent doing 3 worksheets in your chosen curriculum. So don't get those blinders and those narrow vision on this is the only thing that can count, or this is the only thing that looks like school, because there is so much out there time-wise that you can count. And in states where that is a requirement, it's great to get creative and to really utilize. And I think you would be shocked as a parent at just how much time you really are spending in education that you don't even realize you're spending educating your kids. And then that is mastery too, because when we master life skills, we're better people because we have a better skill set, and we're able to then effectively, take that out into the world and be helpful. I talked with a customer just the other day who was gloating about the fact that because of Matthew C, she could now be in the store, figure out a discount, and know what she was going to pay before she ever goes to the counter. And she said, before Matthew C, that was just not a skill set that I possessed. I wasn't comfortable or confident doing it. Factoring a tip at a restaurant stressed me out. And it's true. When you are not comfortable, when you are not confident, when you have not mastered it and you are not using it yourself effectively, that translates into that I dislike, anxiety feelings. I don't love it. It's not fun. And so as a human and in our human flesh, we will avoid it at all. We just don't want to do it. So we can really relate to our kids. Having that empathy and that relation is so important.
I think it's also important because I know in conversations that we have with parents to be wary of the parent who is very adept at something. When you are a parent who just absolutely gets it and it's just easy, as my grandson says, easy peasy lemon squeezy. Sometimes God gives you a kid who does not have that same worldview. And so it's really important for us as parents to be able to put ourselves in the frame of that child and recognize that the things that we find easy might not be easy for us to teach because we find them easy, because we can't conceive of why would it be hard. I'm thinking about a dad and a daughter who came to us in a booth this summer, and the daughter was really struggling mathematically, and her father admitted to having 2 upper level degrees in mathematics, and he was frustrated with her because she did not see the mathematical world in the same way that he did. So it's important for us to recognize that we need to see the world through our children's eyes so that we can help them become whatever their path is to adulthood, and how important that really is. Sometimes the best instructor is someone who's a hesitant instructor, because you can model that teachability right next to your children. We're almost at the top of the hour, ladies. Can you please give us some good closing words, and then I'll have a few administrative details at the very conclusion. Lisa, what are your closing comments for our parents today?
Yeah, well, we threw a lot of information at you today, but as Gretchen said, this is one of the things in my life for which I would never have made a different decision. Homeschooling was such an important and meaningful journey for us. Not every day was golden, but on the whole, it was such an amazing thing that I feel very privileged to have been able to do. I'm so thankful it's an option for us. It's not in every country on this earth, and we are very fortunate to be able to do this. For some of you who never planned on this, COVID has changed lots of people's lives. You may not continue homeschooling. You may decide to put your kids back in school if things ever go back to normal, but you can take advantage of this year and make the most of it in terms of spending this time with your children. It's precious. You're seeing things, they're being a part of your home every day, 24/7, that they have missed, seeing younger siblings take their first steps and say their first words and do all those milestone things. They are there for the ups and the downs and the good and the bad, and you get a chance to share them together instead of having them separate from you. It's a marvelous thing. Find a support network. It's so important. Seek out veteran homeschool moms who've done this before. Most of them are very, very generous with their wisdom and their experience, and you can glean so much from them. Make the most of that and intersperse in your studies and your academics. Find joy in things. Take nature walks. Listen to great music. Find great books. There are terrific book lists out there. Seek them out and do read alouds. My kids are like up into the 30s now. If I start reading a book aloud in their home, they come into the room and plop on the couch. They just love it still because it was a part of our journey. So I wish you the best in yours.
Oh, wow. All the warm fuzzies. Sometimes I think it is hard to not get in your head about all the stuff that you're not getting done. And so my encouragement to you would be quit sweating the small stuff because it's all small stuff. And in the long term, in the big picture, those little moments add up into big dividends, into a bountiful harvest of fruit. If you are patient and you are consistent, those are things. And I can't tell you the number of times where I have talked to a woman who, I would never homeschool, and then they start asking questions, and they just have this heart's desire and this interest. And then pretty soon they're sitting around my table looking at all my curriculum and asking me how to get started and how to do this. It's so doable. The hardest part has already been done if you've made the decision to do it. So, it's not all, yes, fairy tales, rainbows, and there are days where, my husband may hit the door and the fact that they're just all alive is the accomplishment of the day. That is legitimately it. And I'm proud of that. And those days matter just as much as the days where you're running on all cylinders and everything is running like a smooth, greased machine. I wish I could say that is more often than the other, but it's just reality. And so don't beat yourself up. Lots of grace. Mentorship is huge. Pour into yourself. Don't feel guilty about taking time for yourself. If you need quiet, leave the kids with dad, go to a coffee shop, do your lesson planning where you don't have people screaming in the background or little feet running everywhere, or you're worried about what everyone's getting into. That is completely okay because you need to invest in yourself to be able to invest in your family.
Absolutely. I think those are very wise words indeed. So we'll leave you now with those wonderfully wise words from both Lisa and Amanda. And I want to encourage you to join us again. Please feel free to share the recorded link with someone with whom you think would benefit and encourage them to join us on a future roundtable. And I think I speak for us all here at Demme Learning when I say our goal here is to support you in your journey, and we wish you the joy of that experience. Thanks, everybody. Take care.